Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming. As a senator now for about 3 years in total, I've had a gutful of what happens in Parliament, both federal and state. Policies are based now on lies, exaggerations, fear, guilt, intimidation. They're not based on data. And what it means is that parties come into government and they just base policies on political whims. And that costs industry billions of dollars, and in fact, in some of them now, some policies, trillions of dollars. It's doing enormous damage to families, to communities, and to the whole country. What we need to do is to get policies based upon data, solid, hard, scientific data. Because instead of this data, politicians are relying upon emotional scares and feeding their vested interests, serving their vested interests. And that ends up in a cost to families and cost to individuals in our country. Policy failures are costing us trillions of dollars, literally, and I'll go on to explain some of them later. And the other point that's associated with this is that we know that people don't trust many politicians. And that's because politicians are waving around, growing with the breeze because they don't have the data to back them up. So what we're doing this week is we've just been up to Cairns, stopping at all the major provincial cities. We're coming to the Gold Coast now. We're going to Toowoomba tomorrow to introduce the concept of the Office of Scientific Integrity. We had Dr. Peter Ridd with us the whole way, and he initiated this concept, and we'll be pushing it until it's implemented. We must have an Office of Scientific Integrity to scrutinise the science, to protect scientists from politicisation and intimidation, and to give all industry players the confidence that the policy is warranted and just. What we have been focusing on is the science-based policies. But there are other policies where there should be data, but there isn't any data. And one of them is costing families, communities, and the whole nation billions of dollars and a lot of heartache and grief and lost lives. And I wanted to introduce someone who's done a lot of work in that space, Leith Erikson, who's from the association called End All Domestic Violence. So Leith, can you...
Thank you, Malcolm. Thanks for inviting us along. So my role within End All Domestic Violence, which is a gender-neutral domestic violence charity, is to deliver support to victims when they reach out to us. My main focus is dealing with men and fathers. In regards to integrity, in regards to research, we have some issues because a lot of the data we're expecting to see in regard to all victims of domestic violence simply isn't there. In Queensland, for instance, over the last 3 weeks, we've lost one man a week who had been murdered in domestic violence incidents. And based on the volume of calls we're getting from victims, male victims of domestic violence, there seems to be huge gaps in data. I think to do more work here would be valuable to the community because we know that anyone in our society can be a victim of domestic violence regardless of their age, gender or sexuality. And unfortunately, policy isn't addressing some really important parts of that.
Thank you very much, Leith. Is there anything in particular that you need to research? Because my understanding is that you've been to police stations around the country, you've been to courts around the country, and there's just no data to back up policies that are being implemented.
That's right, Malcolm. I think when we're talking about male victims, the narrative has always been that only men can be perpetrators, only women can be victims. And that's not what we're seeing with the support services that we provide through a free call 1-800-FATHER number. The volume of requests for support doesn't match the research. We also see a connection to the way police interact with male victims of domestic violence as being a significant contributor to suicide and increased ideation of suicide. So for us, we have very real concerns about the way data is produced and how that data is then used in policy.
Thank you very much, Leith. And this is costing people's lives, not only through being murdered, men and women being murdered, but also through suicide. We're on the Gold Coast, and the Gold Coast, as everyone knows, is being hammered with the lockdowns due to the COVID response. And I talk about the COVID response, not COVID itself, because they're starting to see now that some of the research is starting to show that there'll be more deaths from suicide as a result of government responses than from the actual virus itself. And so we have to be very, very careful. And what we're saying to Anastasia Palaszczuk, and I've been saying this since the first single-day sitting in the Senate on Monday, the 23rd of March, where is your data? Where is your plan? Where is your justification for some of the things you're doing? Where is your justification for some of the inhuman treatment that you have given to people in the southern part of, in the northern part of New South Wales? Where is the reason for your excluding people with cancer, kids who want their parents? Where is this? It's heartless and it's inhuman. And what we need to see is not only a plan and data to justify what you're doing, we want to see the modelling. I asked Anastasia Palaszczuk in a letter a few weeks ago for her data for her COVID response. She pointed in her response to 2 websites. Our staff checked them. There is no data there. We know that the federal government's modelling is flawed, and yet the whole thing is based upon flawed assumptions and data. What we need is the real data, and what we also want is a recovery plan. Anastasia Palaszczuk's government has not given us a recovery plan. They've just given us lockdowns. So what we need to see is a plan. What I'd also been talking about up and down the Queensland coast this week is the fact that we've had an assessment done on the renewable energy policies and climate policies. Dr. Alan Moran, a noted economist in this country, produced this report, The Hidden Cost of Climate Policies and Renewables, or as some people call them, unreliables and intermittents. What he's done is he's found this cost, and it can't be refuted because all he's done is taken government data from budget statements, from budget documents, from federal government agencies and state government agencies. And he's found that the total cost every year, just on electricity alone, not on the other factors that are affecting these policies, but on electricity costs alone is $13 billion. And it works out at $1,300 per household around Australia. That's the cost of these policies. So the government, another piece of statistics from this is that the federal government used to consolidate this data, but they don't anymore, and here's why they don't. The government has been telling us, falsely, that 6% of a typical family electricity bill is due to the cost of renewables or unreliables. The real figures are 39%, 6.5 times higher. That's why they don't consolidate the report, because if families found that out, there'd be real problems for the government. Both Labor Party and Liberal Party are doing this, and they're wanting to take it further, which will add even more costs. So what we've been doing, we knew that the costs were high and the impact's high. What we've been doing with the CSIRO the last 4 years is holding them accountable to provide the empirical scientific data that justifies these policies. And we have found that the CSIRO has not been able to justify it. So we're told that carbon dioxide from human activity is affecting our planet and needs to be cut. So we asked the CSIRO and said, what is the danger from human carbon dioxide? They repeatedly refused to say there's any danger from human carbon dioxide. So we said to them, well, why are we being told that by politicians? And the CSIRO told us that we would have to ask the politicians. The CSIRO has never said, and they told us they will never say, that carbon dioxide from human activity affects climate. There's the whole basis of the climate policies and the alternative energy policies. There's no basis in science. So we said to them, what about the climate is unprecedented? And they said temperatures. And then we examined the scientific papers they tendered, and we tore them to shreds. They could not withstand the cross-examination. And the CSIRO withdrew the paper. It gave us, after 50 years of climate research, one paper on temperatures. And that paper by Marcotte was withdrawn by the CSIRO, and the CSIRO admitted this. Listen to this carefully. Temperatures today are not unprecedented. They are the words of the CSIRO. Temperatures today are not unprecedented. We then asked them to quantify the impact of our carbon dioxide on the climate, any factor at all in climate. They could not quantify, they could not specify any fact, any amount of change due to our carbon dioxide on temperature or on anything else, rainfall, ocean alkalinity, barrier reef, nothing. So there's no data. Without that data that says our impact is a certain amount, you cannot have a policy. And you certainly cannot measure the progress of implementing that policy. So then, basically, they resorted to one thing. No data. They had to resort to simply unvalidated, false, erroneous, fabricated models, the same as the UN's climate body. And they have been repeatedly proven wrong. We've also enlisted 17 prominent scientists from around the world, and they have told us the same thing. They've looked at the CSIRO's presentations and our response. They agree entirely with us what I've just told you. No data proving that carbon dioxide needs to be cut. No danger from carbon dioxide, and also the fact that they rely upon tin pot models that have been fabricated. So it's not just my word, we're taking statements from the CSIRO that can't be refuted because they're the statements of the CSIRO. And we've also got the vindication from 17 prominent scientists from around the world. Our government is led in many, many areas, whether it's reef regulations for injuring farmers, whether it's stealing of property rights, whether it's electricity prices that are gutting all industries, on false evidence and quite often no evidence. That's what we've got to stop. We've got to restore integrity for the sake of families, for the sake of domestic violence victims and perpetrators, for the sake of businesses on the Gold Coast, businesses on Cairns, businesses right up the coast being affected by the government's lack of a planned response based upon solid data, and just plain lifestyles being affected and gutted. So I'm happy to take questions.
Leith, how many men are you speaking to?
On average, we'd speak to around 120 men a week. I would say 98% of them are experiencing some form of domestic violence. Some of it is quite extreme. As I said, it's a real concern for us that the research doesn't talk about the issues that these men are experiencing.
And the male victims feel like they've got a voice, are they being heard?
Not at all.
So the question was, he hasn't got a microphone, the question was, do the male victims feel like they've got a voice being heard?
Not at all. Unfortunately, when they do reach out to police, and our current research that we've conducted tells us that 70% of men who make contact with police as victims of domestic violence are turned away, which is just shocking for us. There's a huge gap in service delivery, and again we come back to the need for better research and real data that points a clear picture, provides a clear picture of what's going on in our society.
Is there government support for men who are victims?
Is there government support for men who are victims, was the question.
I think there is limited support. There are organisations that are funded quite well by government. Unfortunately, what we're finding with the feedback from these same men who contact us is those services tend to question whether they're perpetrators first before asking them if they need support. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and it all starts with data, good research.
And we have to be careful with the research too, because, for example, the Premier in Queensland has abdicated and said that she will do whatever Jeanette Young, the Chief Health Officer for Queensland, says. Now, the Chief Health Officer, Dr. Jeanette Young, has admitted that she focuses only on physical health. So, Premier, my question to you is, where is the plan for mental health? Who's looking after that? Where is the plan for economic health? Who's looking after that? You're basically handing over the state, you're abdicating the premiership, abdicating governance of this state to a medical officer, rightly for medical issues, but what about all the other issues? And what about the fatalities that will arise because of mental health problems that you are not addressing? What about the businesses being destroyed? What about the lack of support for them, Premier? When are you going to come clean with the data and with the plan? That's what people want. They want to see the way out of this mess. They don't want to see a mess that's just handed over. They want to see a way out of this mess, Premier. Stop abdicating, stop hiding behind the medical profession, and get on with looking after the mental health and the economic health of the whole state.
Senator Roberts, John Barilaro, the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, recently backed down on his threat to boycott the government over proposed koala legislation that was intended to steal private property rights. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, for those who missed the question because of the wind, it appears that John Barilaro has stepped down from or withdrawn from his threat to punish the government. And all I can say to that is it's just yet another typical response from the Nationals. The Nationals have been missing in action. They have not been listening to their constituents. When they do take something to the party room, the government party room, they back down because the Liberals are more interested in serving the inner city Greens than the country. And One Nation has put a lot of pressure on people because a lot of national voters are coming to us. They've been doing that for the last few years. Water, property rights, coal-fired power stations, these are the Nationals area that's been, Nationals have abdicated. What we found with the Nationals is very interesting. At first, they went silent. Then they realised we were here to stay, and they started getting angry and aggressive towards us. And that gave us the opportunity to respond to them with facts. That embarrassed them. So now they're pretending to take on One Nation policies, whether it be water, whether it be property rights, whether it be coal-fired power stations. But when push comes to shove, they run away. And as we saw with the water announcement from the Water Minister, Mr. Pitt, last week in Federal Parliament, the Nationals have been exposed for telling lies about their own water policy. And they're doing that because they're afraid of One Nation, because we have been listening to the farmers, listening to rural communities. The Nationals are no longer a relevant force in this country. The only thing that drives them is our power that pushes forward on the real issues. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Well, thank you very much for coming, and it's over to you.